I stood in my mother's immaculate backyard, physically exhausted from burying a fellow soldier, only to hear her scream, "Get out! Your uniform is ruining the aesthetic." I was banished from my own sister's engagement party. But what my family didn't know as I walked away in disgrace was that the very military uniform they mocked was being used to secretly steal $250,000. And the thief was standing right next to the bride. 2 weeks later, a single hidden camera and a locked iPad would expose a dark web of financial abuse, fake millionaires, and a mother's desperate, suffocating lies. The revenge wasn't loud, but it was absolute. This is a story about discovering that sometimes the people demanding your absolute loyalty are the ones actively destroying your life, and how setting a single, unapologetic boundary can set you completely free. We often mistake family obligations for a life sentence of disrespect. But true sisterhood and self-worth require the truth, no matter how much it costs. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family table to protect your own peace, you are not alone in this fight. Hit the like button if you believe respect must be earned. Share this video with a woman who needs to hear it today. And make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below with your own story. I read every single one.
They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody ever warns you that jealousy is the ultimate poison, capable of seeping into the deepest roots of a family tree. I was standing in my mother's immaculate, manicured backyard, wearing my dark United States Army dress blues, when the woman who gave birth to me pointed a trembling finger at the wrought iron gate and screamed the words that permanently shattered our family. My name is Clara Vance. I am 38 years old, a major in the military, and a woman who had spent her entire adult life trying to be the unshakable foundation for everyone else. I had just driven 4 grueling hours straight from a deeply emotional military funeral. The oppressive July heat was still clinging to my skin, and my heart was incredibly heavy with the fresh grief of burying a mentor. I had driven across the state line without stopping, coffee and the desperate desire to make it back in time to celebrate my younger sister. Instead, I stepped directly into a pastel-colored nightmare. It was the lavish engagement party for my sister Olivia and her fiancé, Julian, and it was abundantly clear from the moment my boots touched the pristine grass that I did not belong. The backyard had been transformed to look like the cover of a high-end bridal magazine. Enormous arrangements of blush pink peonies and white hydrangeas hung from pristine white canvas tents. A string quartet played softly in the corner, almost entirely drowned out by the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the polite, hollow laughter of Julian's wealthy business associates. Waiters in crisp white shirts and black ties carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvre through the crowd. I stood near the edge of the stone patio, my dark blue uniform and the sharp lines of my medals standing out like a violent storm cloud against a perfectly clear, artificial sky. I was exhausted, my shoulders aching under the weight of the heavy fabric, but I forced a smile, searching the sea of pastels for my sister. Julian spotted me first. He was 35 years old, a slick, incredibly charismatic real estate developer with perfectly styled hair, an expensive tailored suit, and a smile that never quite reached his cold eyes. He excused himself from a group of investors and walked purposefully toward me, holding a half-empty glass of vintage champagne. "Well, look who decided to make a dramatic entrance," Julian said, his voice intentionally loud enough to ensure the guests standing nearest to us stopped their conversations to listen. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the brass buttons of my uniform with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Could not stand letting Olivia have the spotlight for one single afternoon. Could you, Clara? You just had to show up looking like a recruitment poster." I took a slow, measured breath, forcing my heart rate to remain steady. "I just got here, Julian. I drove straight from a funeral detail. I am not trying to steal anything. I just wanted to be here to support my sister." Before Julian could fire back another passive-aggressive insult, my mother, Eleanor, pushed her way frantically through the whispering crowd. Eleanor lived and breathed for appearances. Her hair was flawlessly blown out. Her silk designer dress caught the afternoon light perfectly, and her expression, as she looked at her eldest daughter, was one of pure, unadulterated horror. She grabbed my arm with surprisingly sharp fingernails and physically pulled me away from the center of the patio, dragging me toward the shadow of the sprawling oak tree near the fence. "What on earth are you doing?" Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "Look at you, Clara. You are completely ruining the aesthetic of the entire party. Etten is staring at you instead of the engaged couple." "Mom, I just buried Captain Sarah Jenkins this morning," I said quietly, hoping the sheer weight of that reality would pierce through her superficial panic. I did not have time to stop at my apartment to change into a sundress. I drove straight here because I promised Olivia I wouldn't miss the toasts. Eleanor crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You always do this. You always have to remind everyone how brave, how tragic, and how important you are. You could have changed in a gas station bathroom. But no, you wanted the attention. If you cannot be bothered to dress like a normal woman for your own sister's most important day, you can leave." I looked past my mother's rigid shoulder and saw Olivia standing near the towering, four-tiered cake table. Olivia looked incredibly stressed, nervously twisting his massive diamond engagement ring around her finger. For a brief second, she met my eyes. I waited for her to step forward, to tell our mother to stop, to welcome me in. Instead, she quickly looked down at her shoes, remaining entirely silent, choosing her perfect aesthetic over her fiercely loyal sister. Julian stepped up beside my mother, a smug, victorious smirk playing on his lips. "You heard her, Clara. I think it's time for you to march out of here." I did not scream. I did not cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. I simply adjusted my cover, gave my sister a sharp, silent salute from across the perfectly manicured yard, turned on my heel, and walked out the wrought iron gate. I left them to their flawless, fragile party, completely unaware that their entire perfect world was built on a rotting foundation of lies. I drove away from the upscale, gated neighborhood and headed toward the dusty, forgotten edge of town, the heavy silence of my truck's cab pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't go to a depressing, fluorescent-lit motel, and I didn't seek out a dark, crowded bar to drown my sorrow. I went to the one place in this city that always felt like a true sanctuary, Mac's Diner. Mac's was an institution, a small, unassuming brick building with a flickering neon sign and a gravel parking lot. It was owned and operated by a retired military general, a man in his late 60s with a shock of silver hair, a voice like gravel, and a heart of absolute gold. He had been a surrogate father figure to me since my earliest days as a terrified second lieutenant. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the familiar bell jingled overhead, and the diner's signature scent, a comforting blend of strong, dark roast coffee, sizzling bacon, and warm cherry pie wrapped around me like an embrace. Just a few truck drivers sitting quietly in the corner booths. When I walked in, Mac took one look at my dress blues, the rigid posture I was forcing myself to maintain, and the sheer, hollow exhaustion etched deep into my face. He didn't ask what I wanted to order. He simply wiped his calloused hands on his white apron, reached for a thick ceramic mug, poured it to the brim with steaming black coffee, and slid it gently across the worn Formica counter. "Rough day, Major?" Mac asked gently, leaning his forearms against the counter and looking at me with those perceptive, infinitely patient eyes. I sat down on a vinyl stool, my knee immediately throbbing in protest, and wrapped my trembling hands around the warm mug. "I just buried Captain Sarah Jenkins today, Mac." Mac closed his eyes for a long moment and gave a slow, solemn nod. He knew exactly what Sarah meant to me. She had been a fiercely independent single mother, a trailblazer in our unit, and the woman who had mentored me when I was struggling to find my footing in a male-dominated world. She had passed away after a brutal, prolonged battle with an illness she kept hidden from almost everyone. "I promised her I would be there, Mac," I told him, my voice finally cracking under the emotional weight of the past 24 hours. "When she was in hospice, She grabbed my hand and made me swear. I promised her I would be the one standing in full dress. I promised her I would be the one to hand the folded flag to her teenage daughter, so the girl would know her mother was honored by someone who truly loved her. I stood in the blazing sun for 3 hours today, keeping that promise to a dying hero. And then I got in my truck and drove 4 hours straight to Olivia S.'s engagement party, only to get thrown out like trash because my dark uniform clashed with the pink floral arrangement. Mac's jaw tightened. He picked up a rag and slowly wiped a spot on the counter. Was already clean. Your mother. I nodded, feeling a bitter stinging exhaustion settle deep into my bones. Eleanor told me I was ruining the aesthetic. She accused me of wearing the uniform just to steal the spotlight. Julian told me I was an attention seeker. I just wanted to be there for my little sister. I just wanted to show up for her, like I always do. Max stopped wiping the counter, walked around the register, stood next to my stool, and placed a heavy, incredibly comforting hand on my shoulder. Clara, listen to me very carefully, Max said, his voice dropping into that commanding, steady tone that always made people stop and pay attention. Self-respect is not arrogance, and setting a firm boundary is not a betrayal of your family. You have a terrible habit of setting yourself on fire just to keep your mother and your sister warm. They saw a woman walking into a party wearing the physical proof of sacrifice, duty, and honor, and it made them uncomfortable because they live in a world of pure surface. They didn't reject you. They rejected the mirror you held up to their shallowness. His words hit me squarely in the chest, wrapping around my bruised spirit. Mac was entirely right. I had spent my entire adult life ever since our father passed away trying to be the unbending pillar of strength. I was the responsible one, the one who quietly absorbed all the financial hits, the emotional insults, and the blatant disrespect just so my family could keep smiling for their country club photos. I finished my coffee in silence, turning to look at my reflection in the diner's front window. The woman staring back at me was a major. I commanded troops in high-stress environments. I survived grueling deployments. I had earned every single ribbon on my chest through blood, sweat, and tears. I was absolutely not going to let a toxic family dynamic and a slick, manipulative real estate developer break me. I just prayed that Olivia would wake up and see the truth before Julian completely destroyed her life. Here are Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Written in English and formatted as continuous paragraphs, optimized for a smooth, compelling audio narration without any special characters. For the next 2 weeks, I did not speak a single word to my mother or my sister. I threw myself entirely into my work at the military base, burying my grief over Captain Jenkins beneath endless stacks of logistics reports and training schedules. But miles away across town, the pristine cracks in Olivia's perfect life were finally beginning to show. Olivia sat in the living room of the luxury downtown apartment she shared with Julian. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning, panoramic view of the city's skyline, a view Julian arrogantly claimed he easily afforded with his booming real estate ventures. But inside the beautifully decorated apartment, the atmosphere was growing quietly, suffocating. Olivia was drowning in the endless, exhausting details of planning a massive wedding. The venue costs were tripling. The florist was demanding a massive secondary deposit, and the elite catering company needed a final headcount. Whenever Olivia tried to bring up the ballooning budget, Julian simply would wave his hand dismissively, flash his trademark perfect smile, and tell her not to worry her pretty head about it. He insisted his business was bringing in record profits and that she absolutely deserved the wedding of the century. But Olivia was not stupid. She had finally started to notice the subtle cracks in his flawless facade. Hushed late-night phone calls he took out on the balcony with the glass door tightly shut. She noticed how his jaw clenched furiously when he read certain text messages, and how he immediately locked his phone screen the second she walked into the room. This is the universal dilemma so many women face at some point in their lives. You feel a sudden cold twist in your gut. Your intuition screams that something is fundamentally wrong with the person sleeping next to you. But you are absolutely terrified to ask the hard questions because you are afraid of destroying the peace you have sacrificed so much to build. You tell yourself you are just being paranoid. You convince yourself it is just standard wedding stress, desperately ignoring the glaring red flags because acknowledging the truth feels too devastating to survive. One Tuesday afternoon, the grand illusion finally began to shatter. Olivia was sitting on the plush velvet sofa, surrounded by expensive fabric swatches and complicated seating charts. She was waiting for a highly anticipated package of custom wedding invitations to arrive. Needing a quick distraction, she opened the security application on her smartphone to check the front porch camera, hoping to see the delivery driver walking up the steps. The camera feed buffered for a moment before loading the recorded footage from an hour earlier. But Olivia did not see a delivery driver holding a neatly wrapped box of invitations. She saw Julian. Julian was pacing furiously back and forth across the front porch, pressing his cellular phone tightly to his ear. He looked genuinely frantic, his usually perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. The security camera microphone was incredibly sensitive, picking up his hushed, urgent voice with absolute, terrifying clarity. "I told you to give me more time," Julian hissed into the phone, his tone vicious and desperate. "The collateral is completely solid. My sister-in-law is an army major. Her military status, her government clearance, and her pristine credit score guarantee the commercial loan. Just push the damn paperwork through the system. Nobody is going to check the guarantor signatures twice on a veteran business application." Olivia froze completely on the sofa, her breath caught sharply in her throat, refusing to go down to her lungs. The warm blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her cold and numb. Her trembling thumb hit the rewind button on the glowing screen. She played the short video clip again, and then she played it a third time, just to be sure she was not losing her mind. Julian was talking about me. He was talking about a commercial loan. And, most terrifyingly of all, he was talking about forging signatures that no one would bother to check twice. Olivia felt the solid ground drop completely beneath her feet. The luxurious, sunlit apartment suddenly felt like a beautifully decorated prison cell. She closed the application, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone onto the floor. She realized, in a sickening rush, that Clara's uniform, the very uniform Julian had mocked at the party, was the exact thing he was secretly exploiting. She needed more proof. She needed to know exactly who she was marrying, and she needed to know exactly what he was doing to her sister. The next morning, the heavy weight of suspicion hung over the apartment like a thick, suffocating fog. Julian woke up early, kissed Olivia gently on the forehead with his usual practiced charm, and left for his expensive downtown gym. In his arrogant rush out the door, he made a critical, life-altering mistake. He left his silver tablet charging on the edge of the marble kitchen island. Olivia stood perfectly still in the kitchen, staring at the glowing device for a very long time. It felt deeply wrong to snoop. She had always prided herself on trusting her partners completely. But the chilling, undeniable memory of the porch video pushed her forward, completely overriding her lingering guilt. She walked over to the island, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, and tapped the glass screen. Julian had disabled the security passcode weeks ago because he found it annoying to type. The tablet unlocked instantly, granting her full access to his hidden life. He had left his primary email application wide open. Olivia stared at the crowded inbox, unsure of what she was even looking for. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she tapped the search bar at the top of the screen and carefully typed my name, Clara Vance. She fully expected to find nothing. Perhaps an old forwarded message about a holiday dinner or a generic wedding invitation update. Instead, a dozen automated emails immediately populated the screen. They were not messages from me, billing statements from the luxury apartment management company that owned their building. Olivia clicked the most recent email at the very top of the list. The bold black text practically screamed at her from the bright screen. It read, "Monthly rent payment of $3,500. Successfully processed from the checking account ending in 412. Name on account, Clara Vance. Thank you for your continued residency. Olivia felt a sharp, physical pain in her chest, as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. Julian had looked her directly in the eyes month after month and sworn he was paying their exorbitant rent. He had confidently told her his massive real estate deals were easily funding their incredible luxury lifestyle. But it was a complete calculated lie. It was me. I had been paying their rent for 6 straight months to keep my little sister from being evicted onto the street. I had done it completely quietly, swallowing my pride and specifically asking Julian to never mention it, so Olivia would not feel embarrassed or financially burdened during her beautiful engagement. When Julian finally walked through the front door an hour later, sweating heavily in his designer workout gear, Olivia was standing frozen in the exact center of the kitchen, holding the silver tablet tightly in both of her hands. "Hey babe, great workout," Julian called out cheerfully, walking toward the stainless steel refrigerator. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. He saw the tablet in her hands. He saw the dark, wet tears streaming silently down her pale face. "What is this?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling so hard she could barely form the words. "You told me you paid the rent, Julian. You told me your business was doing incredibly well. And what exactly were you saying on the porch yesterday about Clara and her military status?" Julian froze completely. His dark eyes darted rapidly around the kitchen, visibly calculating his next move. Then, his entire demeanor shifted in a horrifying way. The charming, loving fiancé vanished entirely, replaced by something cold, calculating, and incredibly cruel. He went from looking surprised to looking deeply, genuinely angry in a fraction of a second. "You went through my private emails," Julian demanded, taking a heavy, aggressive step toward her, clearly trying to use his physical size to intimidate her into backing down. "Do not dare change the subject, Julian," Olivia cried out, refusing to step back. "Why is my sister paying our rent?" Julian let out a loud, bitter laugh, shaking his head slowly as if she were a foolish, dramatic child. "Because your sister is a massive control freak, Olivia. Clara offered the money because she desperately wants to hold it over our heads. She is lonely, she is bitter, and she is actively trying to sabotage our wedding by making me look like a financial failure. She wants you to be as miserable and completely alone as she is." Olivia hesitated. Julian was so incredibly convincing. He was a master manipulator, absolutely brilliant at turning the tables and playing the ultimate misunderstood victim. He closed the distance between them, wrapped his strong arms around her trembling shoulders, and kissed the top of her head with sickening sweetness. "I am just trying to build a beautiful, secure future for us," Julian whispered smoothly into her hair. "Clara is just violently jealous of your happiness. Do not let her win this game. Do not let her destroy what we have built together." Olivia wanted so badly to believe him. She desperately wanted the perfect fairy tale she had been promised since she was a little girl. So, in a moment of pure fearful weakness, choosing the comfortable lie over the painful truth, she picked up her phone and sent me a text message that afternoon. It said, "Please stay away from Julian and me. Stop trying to ruin my life." When I read that notification on my phone screen later that night, I did not cry, and I did not bother to reply. I just deleted the message, closed my eyes, and waited for the inevitable explosion. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was sitting at my heavy metal desk on the military base. I was reviewing a massive stack of logistics reports, trying desperately to keep my mind completely occupied and away from my family drama. The caller identification on my screen showed it was my primary bank. I picked up the receiver, fully expecting a routine question about a recent deposit. Instead, the voice on the other end of the line delivered a blow that completely knocked the wind out of me. "Major Vance," the polite bank representative said, "we are calling to verify the final details on your commercial business loan application for $250,000. We just need your verbal confirmation before we wire the massive funds to the designated business account. I sat up perfectly straight in my chair. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping into a low, commanding tone. "I have not applied for any commercial loan. There must be some kind of terrible mistake." The representative paused, the sound of keyboard typing echoing loudly through the phone line. "Ma'am, we have a fully completed application right here on file. It includes your military identification number, your detailed service record, and your signature acting as the primary guarantor for a company called Julian Properties Limited." The small, windowless office suddenly started to spin. This is the shared experience of ultimate betrayal. It is that sudden, freezing rush of adrenaline when you realize you fundamentally trusted has completely violated your life. Julian had not just insulted me at a superficial engagement party. He had deliberately stolen my identity. He had weaponized my pristine military record, the very service he openly mocked in front of his wealthy friends, to commit massive, high-stakes financial fraud. "Cancel that entire application immediately," I told the bank representative, gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned blindingly white. "Flag it as entirely fraudulent. Do not release a single penny to that man. I am coming down to the main branch right now to file a formal report and secure my accounts." I slammed the phone down and immediately pulled up my online banking portal. The pending loan documents were sitting right there in my digital inbox. I printed every single page. Every document had my forged signature beautifully copied at the bottom. Every page had my confidential military credentials attached as proof of income and ultimate reliability. Julian had calculated that banks rarely double-check the guarantor if the person attached is a decorated military officer. He had used the respect people have for the uniform to push his dirty scam through the approval process. I packed the thick stack of papers into my leather briefcase. I was absolutely not going to hide in the shadows anymore. I left the military base and drove straight to my mother-us house in the upscale suburbs. My hands gripped the steering wheel with a quiet, simmering fury. When I pulled aggressively into Eleanor-us wide, circular driveway, Julian-us expensive imported sports car was already parked near the front door. I walked up the brick steps and opened the heavy oak door without even bothering to knock. Eleanor and Julian were sitting comfortably in the formal living room, drinking afternoon tea from delicate porcelain cups as if they did not have a single care in the world. They both looked up in absolute shock as I marched into the room. "Clara," Eleanor said, standing up quickly and spilling hot tea onto her saucer, "I told you not to come back to this house until you were ready to apologize to your sister." I did not say a single word. I simply unlatched my briefcase and threw the thick folder onto the expensive glass coffee table. The printed bank papers spilled out across the smooth surface. "Look at them, Mom," I demanded, my voice dangerously calm and incredibly steady. Eleanor looked completely confused, adjusting her reading glasses. Julian, however, turned completely pale. He recognized the blue bank logo instantly. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and he knew he was finally trapped. "What is the meaning of this dramatic entrance?" Eleanor asked, gingerly picking up a piece of paper. "Your perfect future son-in-law just tried to take out a $250,000 loan in my name," I said, staring directly into Julian's panicked eyes. "He forged my signature. He stole my military identification. He is a criminal, Mom." Julian stood up abruptly. His hands were visibly shaking. He looked frantically at Eleanor, and then, to my absolute disgust, he dropped to his knees on the expensive rug and started to cry. "Eleanor, please," Julian sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "I had to do it. I had no other choice. I had to save you." I stared down at Julian, completely bewildered by his sudden theatrical outburst. "Save her," I repeated, my voice laced with heavy skepticism and absolute disgust. "Talking about, Julian?" Eleanor dropped the paper back onto the glass table. All the color drained instantly from her perfectly made-up face. She sat back down heavily on the velvet sofa, looking suddenly frail and incredibly old. Julian looked up at me, fake crocodile tears streaming down his face. I found out about the foreclosure notices. Clara, he cried out, playing the role of the desperate savior perfectly. Eleanor is drowning in massive debt. This beautiful house is 3 months behind on mortgage payments. I desperately needed that commercial loan to pay off the bank, so your mother would not lose her home and her dignity. I did not do it for myself. I did it for the family. I looked away from Julian and stared directly at my mother. Mom, I asked softly, feeling a cold, heavy knot form deep in my stomach. Is this true? Are you losing the house? Eleanor could not even meet my eyes. She stared at her trembling hands in her lap and nodded slowly. I made some very bad investments a few years ago, Clara, she whispered, her voice cracking with profound shame. The debt just kept piling up month after month. I did not want anyone in our social circle to know. It would have been so incredibly humiliating to lose my country club membership and be forced to sell the estate. I felt physically sick to my stomach. My mother, the woman who had banished me from a party because my uniform ruined her aesthetic, was completely bankrupt. She was entirely willing to lose everything she actually had just to maintain the hollow, pathetic illusion of wealth. Eleanor suddenly reached out and grabbed Julian's shoulder, treating him like a wounded child instead of a criminal. He was just trying to help me, Clara, she pleaded, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. He made a terrible mistake, but his heart was in the exact right place. He loves this family. You absolutely cannot press charges against him. It will ruin his entire career. It will destroy Olivia's beautiful wedding. It will destroy my reputation in this town forever. I stood perfectly still in the center of the lavish living room, looking at the two of them. They were so deeply wrapped up in their pathetic lies and their desperate need for social validation that they could not see the actual truth staring them right in the face. Fraud is not love, Mom, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. And enabling a manipulative criminal is not protecting this family. Julian is a con artist. He has been letting me pay his luxury apartment rent for 6 entire months while pretending to be a millionaire to Olivia. He is using you and he is using my sister. Eleanor shook her head rapidly, refusing to accept reality. No, you are lying, she insisted, her voice growing shrill and defensive. Always want to be the hero, Clara. You always want to make everyone else look incompetent. Why are you always so incredibly merciless? Just let it go. Do this one simple thing for your sister. Something fundamental inside me finally snapped. It was not a loud, violent break. It was a quiet, profound, and final closing of a heavy door. I realized in that exact moment that I could never, ever save people who loved their comfortable lies more than they loved me. I had spent a decade playing the role of the reliable shield, but they did not want a shield. They wanted a convenient scapegoat. I bent down and calmly picked up the stack of forged bank papers from the coffee table. I am officially reporting the identity theft and fraud to the police tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I said, sliding the documents back into my briefcase and snapping it shut. What you do with your messy, fraudulent lives from this moment forward is entirely your choice. But I am completely done being the victim of this family. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully out of the house. I did not look back when Eleanor started crying. I did not stop when Julian called my name. I walked out into the warm afternoon sun, opened the door to my truck, and drove away. As I watched the massive house disappear in my rearview mirror, I did not feel sadness or grief. I felt a strange, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. For the very first time in my adult life, I was finally putting myself first. It was Friday night, the highly anticipated evening of the extravagant rehearsal dinner. I was not invited, of course. My mother had made it explicitly clear that my presence would be an unwelcome distraction, but I was going anyway. I did not wear my military uniform this time. I wanted them to see me, Clara Vance, the woman, the sister, and the undeniable force they had deeply underestimated. I wore a stunning, perfectly tailored black evening dress that fell gracefully to the floor. I wore my dark hair down, cascading over my shoulders in soft waves. I did not look like a broken, discarded daughter. I looked powerful. I looked entirely untouchable. The rehearsal dinner was being held in a private, incredibly exclusive dining room at a high-end downtown restaurant. The ceiling was adorned with massive crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow over the long, beautifully decorated tables. Dozens of Julian, us wealthy business partners, investors, and extended family members were seated together, laughing loudly and drinking very expensive imported wine. I completely ignored the confused restaurant hostess and stepped directly into the grand dining room. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me with a soft thud, but the impact of my arrival was immediate. Several people near the entrance stopped talking the second they saw me. The sudden silence began to ripple down the length of the room like a wave. Eleanor gasped loudly, dropping her silver salad fork onto her porcelain plate with a sharp clatter. Julian glared at me from his seat at the head of the main table, his dark eyes flashing with pure venom. Beside Julian sat my sister, Olivia. She looked incredibly pale and profoundly exhausted. She wore a beautiful, delicate white silk dress, but she looked like a fragile ghost haunting her own party. Julian, realizing the entire room was watching this tense exchange, immediately shifted into his practiced public persona. He stood up quickly from his chair, picking up his crystal champagne glass with a confident flourish. Eyed incredibly charming smile onto his face, looking around at his wealthy guests. "Excuse me, everyone," Julian announced, tapping his silver spoon gently against the thin crystal. The ringing sound commanded the attention of the entire room. "Before we continue this wonderful celebration, I want to take a moment to say a few heartfelt words." The room grew completely quiet. Julian looked directly at me, his smiles fixed and hollow. "We are so incredibly glad my future sister-in-law, Clara, could unexpectedly join us tonight," Julian said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Family is always complicated, and we all have our personal struggles. But at the end of the day, we have to forgive each other us flaws. We have to be the bigger person and protect our loved ones, even when they make terrible, selfish mistakes. That is what true, unconditional love is all about." He was putting on a brilliant, disgusting show. He was trying to trap me in front of a massive audience, painting himself as the benevolent, forgiving patriarch while subtly framing me as the unstable, problematic relative. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing to step forward and speak my truth. But before I could even say a single word, the bright crystal chandeliers in the dining room suddenly dimmed, plunging the room into comfortable shadows. Everyone murmured in confusion, looking around the space. A high-definition projector, mounted discreetly on the ceiling, clicked loudly to life. A massive, glowing image appeared on the blank white wall directly behind Julian. It was supposed to be a romantic slideshow of childhood photos and sweet vacation memories. But it was not a slideshow. It was a digital screenshot. I stared at the massive wall, my heart skipping a beat. It was a high-resolution screenshot of Julian's highly secret dating application profile. His handsome picture was displayed front and center, accompanied by the incredibly damning caption, "Single, wealthy, and looking for a discreet good time downtown." The entire dining room erupted into loud, synchronized gasps. Julian spun around so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. The blood drained from his face as he stared at his own cheating words projected 30 feet wide. "Off!" Julian shouted, panic completely shattering his calm facade. "Turn that projector off right now." The image clicked instantly to the next slide. It was a video file, the security camera video of Julian standing on the apartment porch, talking loudly about using my military record to secure his fraudulent commercial loan. His desperate, arrogant voice echoed through the dining room speaker system, bouncing off the elegant walls for every single guest and investor to hear. Julian lunged desperately toward the audio-visual table in the corner of the room, fully intending to rip the projector cords out of the wall. But someone stepped deliberately into his path, blocking his frantic escape. It was Olivia. She was holding a small black remote control in her right hand. Her posture was perfectly straight, and her hands were completely steady. She looked directly at the man she was supposed to marry, And for the very first time in their entire relationship, there was absolutely no fear or adoration in her eyes. Olivia clicked the remote control again. The glowing video file disappeared, instantly replaced by another massive screenshot. It was the detailed email receipt showing my personal rent payment to their luxury apartment complex. Off, Olivia! Julian's hissed venomously, lunging forward and grabbing her bare arm with forceful aggression. Olivia did not shrink back. She violently yanked her arm out of his tight grip. "Do not ever touch me again," she said loudly. Her voice carried across the dead, silent dining room, sharp and unyielding as a blade. Eleanor stood up from her chair in a state of absolute panic, waving her hands frantically. "Olivia, please," she begged, her voice shrill and embarrassed. "Not in front of all these important guests. You are completely ruining the rehearsal dinner. We can discuss this privately." Olivia slowly turned her head and looked at our mother with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. "No, Mom," she replied firmly. "Julian ruined this family, and you helped him hide his criminal behavior because you cared significantly more about an elite country club membership than you cared about your own 2 daughters." Olivia turned to face a massive crowd of stunned guests. Julie and us wealthy business partners were whispering furiously to one another, their faces registering absolute disgust. Julian looked exactly like a cornered animal, frantically searching the room for a friendly face, but finding absolutely none. "My sister wore a military uniform to honor a dying American hero," Olivia said, her voice ringing with absolute clarity and undeniable power. "She quietly paid our rent when we were completely broke. She protected us from the harsh realities of the world. And you, Julian, you wore my love as a convenient disguise to rob us blind and fund your pathetic lies." Julian tried to force out a weak, breathless laugh, looking desperately at his key investors. "She is just having a severe pre-wedding breakdown, folks," he stammered, sweating profusely. "Wedding stress is overwhelming. You know how emotional women get." Not a single person in the room laughed. The silence was incredibly deafening, heavy with the absolute destruction of Julian's carefully crafted reputation. "The wedding is permanently canceled," Olivia announced, her voice unwavering. She reached down to her left hand and slowly slid the massive, expensive diamond engagement ring off her finger. She did not throw it at his face in a fit of dramatic rage. She simply held her hand over his half-empty crystal champagne glass and dropped the ring. It sank immediately to the very bottom with a quiet, final clink. Olivia turned her back on Julian and walked away from the head table. The crowd of wealthy guests parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward the back of the room, straight toward me. She stopped a few feet in front of me, the fierce determination finally cracking just a little bit as hot tears spilled down her pale cheeks. "I am so incredibly sorry, Clara," she wisped, her voice breaking with profound regret. "I should have believed you from the very beginning." I smiled, feeling the agonizing, heavy weight of the past decade completely lift off my tired shoulders. I reached out and gently took her trembling hand in mine. "You found the truth on your own, Olivia," I told her softly. "And you were incredibly brave tonight. That is all that truly matters." We turned around together, our hands clasped tightly, and walked out of the opulent dining room. We left Julian standing completely humiliated in the ruins of his pathetic lies, surrounded by furious investors who were already pulling out their cellular phones to cancel their contracts. We left Eleanor sitting alone in the dark shadow of her own selfish secrets. We walked confidently through the restaurant lobby and out into the cool, refreshing evening air, completely and utterly free. The aftermath of that explosive Friday night was incredibly messy, but for the very first time in my entire life, it was entirely and beautifully real. Julian attempted to flee the state early Saturday morning, frantically packing his expensive designer suits and stolen cash into his luxury sports car while it was still dark outside. But my formal fraud report had already triggered a rapid, highly coordinated federal investigation. The bank had immediately frozen all of his personal and business accounts, and local authorities intercepted him at a dusty gas station before he even reached the interstate highway border. The wealthy investors who had witnessed his spectacular public humiliation at the rehearsal dinner immediately pulled their massive funding portfolios. Juliana's fake real estate empire, which was built entirely on smoke, mirrors, and stolen valor, completely collapsed into worthless dust in a matter of mere days. He was left sitting in a cold holding cell, facing serious felony charges for severe identity theft and high-stakes wire fraud, entirely stripped of the arrogant, glossy charm that had protected him from the real world for so long. He tried calling Olivia a dozen times from the county jail, begging for forgiveness and claiming he was a misunderstood victim, but she had already changed her phone number and blocked his emails. Eleanor, my mother, was forced to finally face the harsh, unforgiving reality of her own terrible financial choices. Without Juliana's promised fraudulent loan to temporarily plug the massive bleeding holes in her bank accounts, the creditors aggressively moved forward with the foreclosure process. She lost the sprawling, pristine suburban estate she had loved significantly more than her own children. The country club quietly revoked her elite membership, and the wealthy friends she had desperately tried to impress suddenly stopped returning her frantic phone calls. She was forced to abruptly downsize to a very small, remarkably ordinary two-bedroom apartment on the opposite side of town. We still speak occasionally, perhaps once every few weeks, but the fundamental dynamic of our relationship has shifted permanently. She knows she can no longer manipulate my deep sense of duty. She knows I will never again serve as the convenient, silent scapegoat for her deep insecurities and massive failures. She is finally learning how to survive on her own without using her daughters as emotional shields. As for Olivia and me, we spent the entire next sitting quietly in a worn red vinyl booth at Mac Us Diner. We ate countless slices of warm cherry pie, drank gallons of strong black coffee, and slowly, painfully rebuilt our fractured sisterhood from the absolute ground up. Mac hovered nearby, offering silent support and keeping our coffee mugs completely full, acting as the steady, unwavering father figure we both so desperately needed during the chaotic fallout. Olivia spent hours crying, grieving the loss of the perfect future she thought she had secured. Also spent hours expressing profound gratitude that she had escaped a lifetime of financial ruin and psychological abuse. It took a forged bank document and a dramatically canceled high society wedding for us to finally learn the hardest, most vital lesson about unconditional family love. True equality in any relationship, whether it is romantic or familial, requires absolute transparency, not financial abuse cleverly disguised as masculine protection. We are so often taught as women to keep the peace at absolutely all costs. We are relentlessly conditioned from a very young age to smile beautifully for the holiday photos, to swallow our valid anger, and to endlessly forgive toxic family members simply because society tells us that is just how family operates. We are told to accept the apologies we never even received. But basic human rights begin inside the home. The absolute right to be fundamentally respected. The right to not be financially exploited or emotionally manipulated by the people who share your last name. Forgiveness is a beautiful, healing gift, but trust is an entirely different matter. Trust must be earned through consistent, honest, and reliable actions over a long period of time. My younger sister and I lost a massive, expensive wedding that day, but we won back our authentic family by finally demanding the absolute truth. We learned that the strongest, most unbreakable bond is not built on keeping shared secrets, faking bright smiles, or maintaining a perfect, flawless aesthetic for the neighbors to admire. It is built entirely on standing up for each other when the world gets incredibly dark and terrifying. I still wear my military uniform with immense pride. I still deeply honor the profound sacrifices of the men and women who serve our country. But I no longer wear the heavy, suffocating, emotional armor I used to carry around my own mother and sister. I am completely done fighting grueling, invisible wars inside my own home. I am finally free to simply be Clara. If you are listening to this story right now, sitting in your quiet living room, walking through a park, or driving in your car, I want you to take a long, incredibly hard look at your own life and the people you allow into your sacred inner circle. Have you ever been the designated scapegoat in your family, constantly carrying the heavy, unfair burden of everyone else's massive mistakes, only to be proven completely right in the very end? Have you ever felt the agonizing, isolating sting of being told you are the entire problem simply because you are the only person brave enough to point out the burning fire in the room? I know exactly how heavy that burden feels on your shoulders. I want to give you a very clear, urgent warning regarding the people who claim to love you. If you have a romantic partner who actively tries to isolate you from the specific sibling, parent, or best friend who has always fiercely protected you, you need to pay very close attention to their motives. If they casually use your family's hard-earned achievements to blindly boost their own professional resume, or if they constantly manipulate situations to make you feel like your loyalties are painfully divided, those are massive, waving red flags that you absolutely cannot ignore. A user, a narcissist, or a financial abuser will always try to make the ultimate protector look like the ultimate villain. They desperately need to eliminate your strongest support system so they can completely control your reality without any outside interference. Do not ever let them dim your brilliant light or twist your authentic truth. You absolutely deserve to be surrounded by people who genuinely celebrate your profound strength, not parasitic people who only seek to selfishly exploit it. You deeply deserve a love that feels incredibly safe, calm, and entirely transparent. You do not deserve a love that requires you to constantly shrink yourself, hide your proudest accomplishments, or sacrifice your own hard-earned financial security just to make an insecure partner feel big and powerful. True love does not ever forge your signature on a legal document. True family does not banish you, celebration, simply for being your authentic, honorable self. I want you to tell me your own personal story in the comments section directly below this video. I read every single one of your deeply moving messages. I know exactly how incredibly lonely and deeply isolating it can feel when you are the only person speaking the harsh, undeniable truth in a room completely full of comfortable, destructive lies. Sharing your unique story is the very first, incredibly powerful step toward taking your immense personal power back. When we bravely speak our deepest truths out loud together, we permanently take away the dark, silent sheaths where manipulators and abusers thrive. If this specific story resonated deeply with your own life experiences today, please hit the like button right now so this vital, educational message reaches the thousands of other strong women who desperately need to hear it this exact week. Share this video with a loving sister, a lifelong best friend, a beautiful daughter, or absolutely anyone who needs a strong, unwavering reminder of their own inherent power and undeniable self-worth. You might be the exact catalyst they need to finally find the courage to walk away from a highly toxic situation and reclaim their own beautiful life. And please subscribe to the channel to join our rapidly growing, fiercely supportive community of unapologetic truth-tellers. We are actively building a safe, empowering space where absolute authenticity boldly wins over fake aesthetics every single time. We are building a powerful community where women fiercely protect each other, genuinely uplift each other, and absolutely refuse to settle for anything less than total, unconditional respect. Until next time, please aggressively guard your beautiful heart. Always implicitly trust your deep feminine intuition, because it is almost always exactly right. Never, ever apologize for setting firm, unbreakable boundaries to fiercely protect your own mental peace. Always remember your absolute, undeniable worth in this world. Thank you so incredibly much for spending your valuable time listening to my personal journey today. Stay strong, keep speaking your truth, and take wonderful care of yourselves.
As we reach the end of Clara and Olivia's journey, the real lesson here goes far beyond a canceled luxury wedding or a foiled bank fraud. It is about the heavy, invisible, emotional armor so many of us are actively conditioned to wear. As women, we are so often taught to be the ultimate peacekeepers. We are relentlessly told to shrink ourselves, to hide our hard-earned achievements, and to silently pay the physical and emotional rent for our family's dysfunction, all just to keep the picture looking absolutely perfect for the outside world. We absorb the insults, we pay the hidden bills, and we convince ourselves that taking the high road means becoming a doormat. But Clara's story teaches us that true, undeniable strength isn't about absorbing endless abuse. It is about having the profound courage to simply stop playing the game. When Clara finally refused to be the family's reliable scapegoat, the entire fraudulent illusion collapsed. That is the terrifying, beautiful truth about toxic family dynamics. The moment you stop playing your assigned, silent role, the manipulators lose absolutely all of their power over you. Olivia's transformation is equally vital to this lesson. It shows us that it is never too late to open your eyes to the truth. It takes immense bravery to look at the person you love, the person you thought you were going to build a life with, and realize they are a carefully constructed lie. She chose the painful, messy truth over a comfortable, beautiful illusion, and in doing so, she won back her absolute freedom and the sister who truly loved her. Remember this: blood may make you related, but loyalty, respect, and honesty are what actually make you family. You are always allowed to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. You are allowed to fiercely protect your peace, your finances, and your beautiful heart. This content was researched, developed, and manually edited by us to bring meaning and valuable life lessons.